And that brings me to our panelists. On my left is Felix Odhiambo of the Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa. On his left is Bessy Kathambi, who's a governance analyst. Thank you very much for joining us again, Bessy. And an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, that is Dr. Alutalala Mukhwana. Karibuni sana. So let's start with the sports ministry. It appears to be scandal after scandal after scandal. What are we not getting right there? Felix, let's start with you.
Well, I think it is an information. I mean, Kenyans are increasingly getting used to massive scandals being unearthed by the Office of the Auditor General year in, year out. And I think, if my recollection serves me right, the latest scandal involving this ministry is one in a series of many involving other departments of government, including NYS, the power and the energy sector, among other things. The fundamental question is, what are we not getting right with the kind of legal and constitutional framework that we have in place that were intended to promote integrity, that were intended to promote good governance. And yet, with these legislations and with multiple of agencies that are charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption, we still have problems of integrity coming in every now and then. I think, having said that, I think it is also incumbent upon us to laud recent efforts that we have seen, the new impetus in fighting corruption, the new Director of Public Prosecution, the coordination with other sectors and agencies like the Director of Criminal Investigation and Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. I hope that Parliament will take a cue from these multiple coordinating agencies and for the first time have it right. The committee meetings, I mean, parliamentary committee act as quasi-judicial entities, and yet when we recall the saga surrounding the investigation around the Ruaraka land, etc., Parliament or parliamentary committees have not stepped up to their mandate, and so I hope that they will be able to look at the Auditor General's report, which, by the way, is authoritative. Ever since. I think that is one agency of government that has been actually doing its work. Okay. And they should be able then to base, look at those findings with a view to bringing officials of the sports ministry and indeed any other sector to book. Okay.
Yes. Bessy, I want you to come in there and I would like you to limit your comments to the sports ministry because this is not the first time that a scandal, as we mentioned, has come out of the ministry. Has it been an issue of leadership? Have we not taken our sportsmen seriously enough?
Well, for one thing, what I know about the sports ministry is that we have misguided objectives in terms of what is of priority, what is of value to this country as a sport. And then when you look at the people who hold these particular positions, is either they don't know how key sports is for this country. So if we have people who understood what the sports industry can do for Kenyans, then we would not be having the kind of scandals we have. But it's more so like, it's also becoming a culture that we are entertaining. Every day, the sports ministry has had scandal after scandal, and nobody tells us the end of it. So if we don't value sport that much, then I can see why I can siphon as much money for taxi. I've heard you read, and I was wondering, we pay laundry for what? Who are we paying for laundry? Yeah, such kind of things tells you also that we don't value sports in this country. We've not valued it from now and even at the back, going backwards. So there's need for us to have people who hold these positions with an understanding of what sports can do for this country.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Mukhwana, do you foresee any forward-moving action from the parliamentary committee? Because the parliamentary committees hold sitting after sitting after sitting. What comes out of it?
Olive, when I got an invitation, first of all, thank you for the invite, and congratulations for your new job. Nice to have you at NTV. When I got this invitation, my first question on my mind was, is it really worth spending time discussing on the topic of corruption? be it the Ministry of Sports, be it the Office of the Auditor General, wherever it would be. And allow me to read this definition of us. And at the end of it, my colleagues and yourself maybe can try and tell me whether it fits into who we are. Now, this is in 1789, way back in 1789, and this is the Encyclopedia Britannica. It defines who the Negroes are. Negroes is a general term used to refer to the blacks. Disregard the negativity, but it refers to the blacks. And this is what this 1798 Encyclopedia Britannica defines the black person. And it says that this is a name given to a variety of the human species who are entirely black and are found in the torrid zone, especially in that part of Africa which lies within the tropics. That's not it. And now here is how we are defined. Vices, the most notorious, seem to be their portion of this unhappy race: idleness, treachery, revenge, cruelty, stealing, lying, profanity, and nastiness, have extinguished the principles of natural law and to have silenced the ripples of conscience. They are strangers to every sentiment of compassion and are awful example of the corruption of man when left to himself.
Actually, that sounds a bit harsh.
Thank you. I want your definition of harsh. The reason why I have read this, when I came across the definition, I asked myself, Olive, what is it about us Kenyans? Because this sports ministry scandal you're talking about is not new, not in the sports ministry, not in Kenya. So the problem clearly we should be discussing is not what is the problem with the sports ministry. The problem we should be discussing is what is the problem with we as a people in Kenya. Mwafrika shida yake nini? And our problem is that we are a thoroughly dishonest species. Wherever we are placed, we look at the first opportunity to defraud the other, the first opportunity to be ahead of the other, and it does not matter how we get there. That's what defines us. There is a very hilarious saying in Kikuyu, which says that ambaye anaiba na asiposhikwa anakula haki yake. Think about that. That's who we are. Thank you.
Okay, but I would like to bring it back to my question,
Yes.
which was, do you foresee anything coming out of this probe by the MPs? Because the MPs themselves have been implicated
Thank you.
in taking, what was it, blue envelopes, is I think how Wetangula put it, of 10,000 shillings.
Thank you. Olive, I thought I had answered. But if you want me to break it down,
Break it down for
let
me,
me
please.
break it down. The parliamentarians originate from amongst us. True or false?
True.
They are a reflection of who we are. And these parliamentarians, believe you me, hawa ni mamluki wa kukodishwa. They are on hire and they'll play the game depending on where the sweetest reward comes from. It is abnormal even for you to expect, Olive, that the parliamentarians will solve the problem that we have. So in my view, the solution to the corruption in this country lies elsewhere, not within parliament.
Okay, then what then?
Number one, we need a radical surgery of our own values as a people. We need to understand that the end should never be justifying the means. We have what you call national values in the Constitution. I keep saying there is no such thing as national values because we have no nation in the first place. What we have is a collection of our tribal communities having various values. I've just cited what the other community values as haki yao if you're not caught. We have different values as a people. we need to agree on what is right for Kenya. If the national values in the Constitution are what you've agreed upon, then we must accept that we must be guided by the national values.
Okay.
Simple.
All right. And Bessy, you were nodding very vigorously, but you're nodding as well, Felix.
Yeah.
Chebukati raised the fact that this is the 8th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution. Dr. is talking about national values. Is there any point to that chapter in the Constitution?
Well, I think Doc is being too extreme. He's being a little bit too harsh. One of the things he has said is a culture. Well, we have a nation. I believe I am a Kenyan, and I am proud to be a Kenyan. That I would not trade my country for anything. But when it comes to our culture, we are not culture to value, to our value system. Our value system has been corrupted. And instead of us throwing away what we call ourselves as Kenyans, we need to work on that value system. Why is it, I agree on the bit of our culture, is that we are telling our children it is okay to steal as long as we're not caught. We've had that because even when you did your survey and you asked a few young people, young men and women, they said, as long as I'm not caught, I can steal. So what we have been entrenching in us is that when I sit on any position today, if I'm appointed maybe the PS and I find a loophole that makes sure that I will not be caught, the tendency would be that I would also steal. But what have we done to remove that culture? Because we are glorifying people who have been stealing. I never knew Ngritas or the lady for NYS. But do you know our children know who is Ngritas? But we've not brought in Paul Terragat, who has brought the sports torch to this country called Kenya. Nobody goes, if you say you're Kenya, you're the people who run anywhere you go outside the country. But we don't know who is Paul Terragat. It's the culture we have, we are entrenching in our children.
Felix, if you could come in there.
Yes, I mean, it's true. Chairman Chebukati reminded us that this is an anniversary of since the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution. And if the Constitution was to be audited, and I agree with Bessy and Daktari, one of the gaps insofar as the implementation of the Constitution is concerned is actually on values and Article 10, values and principles, and Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity. And one of the reasons why the 2010 Constitution was hailed as both transformative and progressive was the entrenchment of these values and principles and chapters on leadership and integrity, which, by the way, is missing even in the South African Constitution that we heavily borrowed from. And the gap is that we live to these constitutional aspirations and principles? And the question to that, the answer to that question is no. But with respect to your specific question as to whether Parliament would be able to discharge this function, and again it takes us back to auditing the Constitution. I think one of the gaps and the failures that we have seen since 2010 is actually the role of Parliament. In my view, Parliament has not quite internalized the role of Parliament in a pure presidential system. And if you look at the conduct of the MPs, the partisanship, the brinkmanship, etc., with which business in Parliament is transacted, you get a feeling that they are still caught up in the parliamentary system, the system that is in place in the UK, where members of Parliament must be loyal to the Prime Minister, etc. In a pure presidential system, and that is where the gap is, Parliament, regardless and irrespective of party affiliation, must oversight the executive. The question is, has Parliament lived up to this, this constitutional role, at least compared to the United States Congress, that is the system that we base this on? In 1974, during the impeachment process of President Nixon, it is the Republican-dominated Parliament that actually went to a Republican president and told them the jig was up. You had to resign. But if you compare that with our Parliament and look at the way that Parliament behaves, there is a serious gap in terms of understanding their role in a pure presidential system. Okay. And having said that, therefore, then Parliament inspires, whether Parliament or parliamentary committees, inspires very little confidence in terms of dealing with this. And thank God, the Speaker has flagged this several times. And I think Speaker J.B. Muturi has been very, very robust in trying to remind Parliament of their role insofar as oversight is concerned.
Felix raises a good point. He says Parliament has not fully understood what its role is and has been playing loyalty politics. In fact, opposition leader Raila Odinga defined them as the weakest link so far now in the war against graft. Do you agree that Parliament has not fully embraced its role? Yes and no. You know, my brother Felix, I've had an opportunity to listen to him before, and he's a very polite guy. And he's actually being polite to the parliamentarians because the truth is that the parliamentarians are not fools. We have lawyers in that house and very highly educated guys. Of course, you have a mixture. But it is not that parliamentarians have not understood their role. Felix is just being polite. These parliamentarians, for you to understand why parliamentarians are doing what they're doing and how they're doing it, you must trace to their origin before they came to the House. These parliamentarians came through an election, a supposed election. Then you go back and ask at how elections are done, who determines who gets what position. And you then things start ringing into your mind about the server, about haki yetu, and you realize that the people who control things in this country determine who is elected in Parliament. So for us even to vest the authority of oversight on parliamentarians, we are moving with a presumption that these parliamentarians legitimately got elected into Parliament. But Olive, there are parliamentarians in that Parliament who owe their positions to their principals up there. Simple and plain. So they are in Parliament for a cause, to particularly fulfill the mandate, the unofficial mandate of their superiors. And that explains why, Felix, we will never have a scenario of the 1974 impeachment in the US that you've related to. Because you cannot have any parliamentarian standing up to impeach a president or a president, for example, for whom he's grateful for having brought him in Parliament. So the problem we have in this country, we must go back to the big elephant in the room on the issue of transparency, accountability in how we do our public affairs. Chief being our elections. Look at the drama we are being treated through at adversary towers. In any civilized country, these fellows will not even have the temerity to do what they are doing. Why are they doing it? Same thread that goes back to how they came to those offices. They're somebody. They are doing what they're doing because when they resigned, it was not supposed to be a resignation. The motive was different. Since the motive was not achieved, hey, let's go back and have a second bite of the cherry. Come on, okay. These things originate elsewhere. To bring it to you, I mean, Daktari has brought it full circle. Now we are back at the anniversary towers. He says anywhere else in the world, they would not have the temerity to do what they're doing. Do you agree with him that there is somebody behind the scenes pulling the strings?
Yeah, we are being entertained with the puppet show here because we have puppets. That's what he's saying in very simple terms. We have puppets. But before that, he's talking about the political, the people in Parliament having someone to owe to. But I don't think so. Their role here is that they're still political toddlers. They don't understand that they have a role and a key role. So you can't expect a toddler to be doing a grown-up thing. They have not grown. They don't have the political maturity, neither the stamina to understand when they are called honorable members. You're talking about the blue envelopes that Rectangular was talking about. Unless you're really immature or mature, you should be able to distinguish the kind of position you hold in that parliament, how honorable you are. When we come back to the two who are insisting that they have to come back to IEBC, I mean, it's really a sham and a shame for them because you cannot have called us in public, in broad daylight, accuse the very person that you are telling, I want to come, give me space to work, that he is not able to control the commission. So if you are being errant, you've already excluded and exited. please stay there. Yeah, it's time you stayed away, and we will now be able to deal with you following the law.
All right.
Yes.
Felix. Dr. He said, he imputed that the resignations were not really resignations. Were they resignations to you?
For the IEBC commissioners?
Yes.
And let me try to be as blunt as possible. Take a cue under the advice of my learned senior. With respect to IEBC, first of all, I agree with my colleagues here, but also I really hope that the two commissioners, ex-commissioners, I want to use Chebukati's word, actually truly live in this country. If they do, then they should have been able to follow the public uproar regarding their purported return to work. The country, for the first time, is very unanimous in this. There seems to me to be a bipartisan spirit in condemning the actions and things like that. But having said that, let me put things into perspective. On this particular issue, I agree with Chairman Chebukati. We haven't actually followed the court ruling that we seems to be erroneously basing our opinion on, but we have also forgotten to retrace the circumstances that triggered their resignation. Number one, and as affirmed by the court ruling that we've seen, Chebukati actually made reference to it, is that one, on the 15th of April, the two commissioners publicly resigned. And in their resignation, they were in solidarity with CEO Ezra Chiloba, whom they took offense with his suspension. And they also indicted Chebukati on what they said were serious and catastrophic weaknesses in leadership. Now, Chebukati is still the chair of the IEBC, and Chiloba is still suspended. Now, the first question is, what has changed? Number two is that following their resignation, they went to the IEBC commissioners, and I did due diligence on this, and established that they actually filed their clearance certificates. If you know that if you are leaving and vacating a job, you must fill a form that effectively discharges you from that position. That was one. Now, the third point, which is very fundamental, is that on the basis of their own sworn affidavits, their own sworn testimonies, they confirmed the fact of their resignation, which was followed by a deposition. Deposition in law is a written statement under oath that they had actually vacated their position. And then finally, by their action of abdicating from work for the last 4 months, it confirms both constructively and actively of the fact that they were no longer at IEBC. Now, for them to purport to come back, and by the way, these two commissioners were the greatest impediment to democratic elections last time. They have no demonstrated track record of effective election management. We don't need them. They are better managers in this country on elections. They are both clueless, as I said repeatedly in 2017, about election management. Now, for them to purport to want to come back epitomizes a serious electoral impunity, electoral authoritarianism, and a culture that violates both their personal integrity and their public integrity. Chebukati is right, they are ex-commissioners, and they actually should step aside. And by the way, finally, one last thing. The fact of the law is clear. Once you write to the president, which they post under oath, their responsibility rests at that. It is not there. It doesn't then go further to say that the president did not respond to our letters. They had effectively resigned and they should step aside.
Okay, so we'll pursue that further. I know, Doctor, you challenged him to speak straight and he's pulled no punches.
Thank you.
We take a short break now, but we'll be back with more of that discussion. Welcome back. You're watching NTV Today, and I'm joined by three panelists. That is Felix Odhiambo of the Electoral Law and Governance Institute for Africa, Bessy Kathambi, who's a governance analyst, and Dr. Mukhwana, Dr. Mukhwana, who is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And before we went on the break, we're discussing the corruption scandals that have rocked the country. We've discussed everything from the Sports Ministry, the PS, Sports appearing now before the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, and what is happening at the IEBC. We just heard from the chairman who said there is no room for the two commissioners seeking to, what some have said, sneak back into the commission after resigning in April. That was on April 16th. And the two commissioners in question are Consolata Nkatha and Margaret Mwachanya. We are yet to hear from them, but we expect to do so. Back to the conversation at hand. Felix raised a number of issues before we went on the break, and he pulled no punches. Dr. were you happy with that particular response in that? Where graft in the country is concerned?
He was spot on, to be fair to him. He was spot on. Olive, I have said, and I repeat, that the issue of corruption is taking too much of our time. Actually, here, in this conversation, we ought to be discussing on what is the best way, which means how should we develop our livelihoods. That is what people who have gone to school should be discussing. We have young people who have no jobs. You go to every slum around here, you find so many young men just seated by the roadside. Unfortunately, the politicians create the agenda. We discuss what they want. So the discussion today is not you who has set it. The discussion agenda has been set elsewhere. So we find ourselves talking about it. Corruption, what I prefer to call theft, because when you call corruption, you're giving it a very nice name. It is theft. It's not going to go away. Number one, I have said that our values are wrong. Number two, we are okay that we have the values in the Constitution, but the implementation is near zero. Why are we implementing near zero? Because in every society, there are people whom we call leaders, whose responsibility is to enforce what the society has agreed that ought to be our binding values and rules. Unfortunately, again, we go to the same melodrama that our leaders are the problem. Our leaders have failed to enforce the integrity rules. Look at 2017, before the elections. There was this requirement that every member of parliament to be eligible to vie must have a university degree. The reason was because the tasks up there are such that there is some minimum intellectual competence that a member of parliament must have. So when my sister here describes them as immature, I don't agree with it, but yes, she might be having a point. What did the parliamentarians do? They simply implemented for the governors. They said governors should have a degree. But for themselves, postponed. It was postponed from 2013. 2017 it was postponed. Maybe it will come in 2022. What am I saying? Leadership crisis. I said before that the moment the person who is supposed to slay the dragon of corruption decides, it will be slain. And that is Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta. You are seeing it begin to happen.
Okay.
He is the man who will decide that the enough is enough. Because these corruption syndicates have the highest authorities out there. And do not cheat yourself, Olive. You are not going to be a PS sanction expenditure of 200 plus millions without documentation if you do not know who is backing you.
Okay.
That money does not end with that PS. That money ends somewhere else. And those are the forces behind the corruption in this country. They are called the deep state. It is a state which is not official, but it's a state indeed.
Okay.
The president has to deal with the deep state and everything will fall in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Felix, I want to bring you back to the IEBC. You were speaking about the IEBC before we went to on the break. And when I said you pulled no punches when you made reference to Nkatha Maina and Margaret Mwachanya. It seems you didn't hold in very high regard their contribution to the IEBC. Could their return have been informed by the audit queries that have been raised? I don't know that you read the paper over the weekend, but the Auditor General has raised certain queries with regard to the last election, which were raised in an internal audit, and which informed, of course, the suspension of Ezra Chiloba. Could their attempted return to the Commission be informed by those questions?
Well, it is possible, and so it's also equally possible that their return to the IEBC, or their decision to want to return, has also been motivated by two other things. One, they found out that the outside world there is very cold. No parks, no bodyguards, no nothing. But also, most fundamentally, it is possible and rightfully conceivable that their return may have been motivated by the politics of the 2022 elections. If you are in doubt about their competence, you only need to read the exit memo of Rosalind Akombe. And you don't have to be a brain surgeon to put faces to the writings and things like that. But having said that, I'm one person who, subsequent to the elections, held meetings with Chairman Chebukati and in the spirit of the handshake. And I told myself that if under the new spirit of the handshake, where the president is demonstrating serious efforts in combating corruption, in promoting inclusivity and national cohesion, and in dealing with one of the major elephants in the room, and that is the electoral justice in this country, then we ought to support the president. As a result of the building bridges process, it is no longer an issue as to the legitimacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. I think it's legitimately in office. But the issues of credibility that surrounded the 2017 elections must be addressed, because if we don't address them, they will recur in 2022 with catastrophic consequences. And yes, one such issues, and I said it repeatedly in 2017, was the question of election integrity. And what we saw, the 4.6 billion shillings, is just a tip of the, what is the expression?
Iceberg.
The tip of the iceberg. If you open up that audit to look at the August 8th election and look at the procurement of the Kim's kits, where Otimo forgot, got 3.8 billion shillings to supply that, there were serious issues of integrity that fall squarely in the face or in the doorsteps of the CEO and the Secretariat of the Commission. And we have to resolve that. Why? Because in this country, election integrity is called the deep state that the Dr. made reference to, and may add to that the state capture. Questions of election integrity have direct bearing on the electoral outcomes. It's quid pro quo. You allowed the Secretariat to be involved in corruption so that they can look the other side when state capture and the deep state are manifesting and manipulating things to win the elections. Be that as it may, I think the integrity issues of the 4.6 billion must be addressed just like the sports ministry and things like that. And if this 4.6 billion can be proved, and by the way, part of the integrity issues involve the former vice chair, Nkatha herself, I think to the tune of 2 million shillings. These issues must be addressed, and if we have to resolve the integrity issues that surround the 2017 election, even if it means that the entire Secretariat must be constituted. Okay,
I'm going to have to come back to you two gentlemen a bit later to explain to me exactly what this deep state you're talking about is. But Bessy, what are your thoughts on their return? What is the motive, in your opinion? What has motivated their return to the Commission?
I think it's also is a misguided interpretation of the court ruling, that they thought because the court has said that they didn't follow due process, that their earlier mistake has been rectified or has been sanitized by the court. What they didn't care to understand is the implications of that court ruling. However, for them to come back, when we have their own internal audit saying that they have lost 4.6 billion, this is the part where I ask myself, the DCI should be there, pouncing on them. This is not an external person coming in to say you have stolen 4.6. It is their own internal audit that has put them on check. That alone by itself, integrity has been tainted. So they can't come back to office. Two, I expect also the anti-corruption body to be on their case and charge them, because this is something from within. These are people who are being accused. There's evidence for it. Then we have what I've been asking. Yes, we hear money is taken. Money is paid from somewhere. It's paid from Treasury. And as long as Treasury is paying out this money, someone somewhere benefits. If Treasury cannot get back that money, then we will have this conversation day in, day out. Our money has to come back. However it was paid, whoever was paid, let them return the money and ask for amnesty. Maybe we can consider it. But that money has to come back. Okay. Their motivation mainly, I think, is a misguided aspect of the judgment that was given. Interpretation of the court ruling. Yes, okay. And that maybe gave them the opportunity now, because the audit has come out pointing fingers who did what. So it's now coming to clean up what they can get away with. But it has to stop.
Out one thing on that court judgment, which I agree with my sister here is misguided. In the same ruling at paragraph 29, the learned judge proceeded to acknowledge the fact of their public resignation and directed the appointing authorities to move with speed to expeditiously fill the vacancies. So they are wrong. They're misreading. They are not reading the entire judgment. The paragraph 29 of that judgment is clear. The judge faulted them for a procedural resignation. And by the way, it is clear that a lot of evidence and materials were not placed before that judge, because in another case, the Okeya Mtata case, by their own sworn affidavits, they confirmed to the fact that they had resigned. And their deposition in that very case, they acknowledged the fact that they had written to the president communicating their resignation. The law is clear. Their task ends at that. It is not for them to compel the president to act on their letter. And the fact that as a recruitment process has not been initiated is neither here nor there, and they cannot rely on that. Okay.
Dr. Are they being oblivious to what President Uhuru Kenyatta aptly described as the public mood? Because Infotrack released poll results yesterday, which showed that 51% of Kenyans are not in support of their return. 41% of Kenyans have absolutely no trust in the IEBC to conduct credible polls as presently constituted in future.
No, they are not being oblivious. These are smart chaps. They know what they're doing. These are people who know why they were appointed there. They were fit for purpose. I've told people many times that in this country, you don't get such high-ranking positions unless you are fit for purpose. You may have all the PhDs in the world, you will not get those appointments unless you are fit for purpose. So these ladies and one gentleman, I think, know what they're doing. I have said that their resignation was tailored to achieve a certain objective. That objective was not achieved. And that therefore should explain why the relevant authorities did not activate the requisite follow-up mechanism so that these fellows could go home. It's not that they didn't know. And now that that objective was not achieved, they have decided to come back to have a second attempt, what my late professor, the late our convincing guru said, to have a second bite at the cherry. They are not foolish, but they must get a reason for coming back. And that reason is the court judgment. Olive, if you want a court to give you guidance on a decision you have made, you apply to go to court and get what we call the legal interpretation of that particular decision. These fellows did not apply to court to get an interpretation. They cannot therefore now claim to fish somewhere from within the decision of the court and say, hey, wait a minute, we resigned, yes, we handed over, yes, but now that the court says we did not resign properly, we are back. That is dishonesty, but it's a dishonesty that is choreographed. It's a dishonesty that is intended to achieve the reason why they are in that commission. Do not forget that the Election Act amendment that was done when Jubilee was fighting NASA, that effectively made elections in this country to be manual. Nobody's talking about it. And there lies the time bomb. This IEBC is a sitting time bomb. By now it should have gone home. Why is it not going home? Because it's not the right time for them to go home for the purpose for which they were put there.
All right.
And therefore it's a monstrous problem that Kenya is facing. And forget about the handshake business. Nothing has been resolved. That is merely a Panadol being prescribed for a cancerous wound. Come 2022, our people will die on these streets unless an overhaul of the problems that we have are genuinely resolved. I said we are a dishonest species. That is the problem.
Bessy, do you read dishonesty in the dragging of the feet of the legislative process where the selection panel is concerned?
Yes, I read mischief because, like the national majority leader, Duale, he knows that they should have already given a list. It should have been done 7 days after they resigned. But because we are dragging feet, there's some bigger, mischievous plan when it comes to the election for 2022 that is being hatched. Their coming back is not just, it's miscalculated move for them because whoever sits, as he says, somewhere orchestrating the whole plan misinterpreted for them at what time they needed to come back. However, that said, now that we know, he has brought in a very key thing that we ask, and I will keep asking. IEBC should have been disbanded immediately Roslyn left because she raised issues of integrity. Nobody talks about that aspect. When we have structures and institutions that we are also questioning their integrity as the Kenyan people, then why should they be in office? Yes, they should have been removed. Now that comes back to the people who have been brought in by the same system that we are calling that lacks integrity to be the members of parliament. Will you call them off? Will you institute measures to get rid of the people who gave you that position? The same thing Dr. has been asking. Will they do it? No. So it is a game of tic-tac. Today we pass on, they are coming back. Tomorrow is another aspect. Oh no, the judge said a different ruling. So we're just playing a limbo here.
Okay. Yeah. I want to get to President Uhuru Kenyatta's visit to the US and what could possibly come up in the Oval Office, I imagine, if that's where they're meeting, with regard to questions on graft and electoral justice. But Felix, first, I want to put this question to you. As Kenyans, we've talked a lot about culture. We have this culture of serikali tusaidia, serikali nisaidie. And in Colombia, only yesterday, they went to the polls on a raft of anti-corruption measures. Their Comptroller General, in a quote in a BBC article, said they're stealing everything. Yes, and that's a gentleman known as Edgardo Maya, and he says corruption is costing their country as much as $15 billion US dollars a year. I don't even want to imagine what it costs us. It's been said at a third of our GDP. And part of what they have proposed, or what was proposed, although it didn't go through, was measures including a cut in the wages of the members of Congress, bans on alternative sentences like house arrest for corruption, forcing elected officials to publish their tax returns, and a 3-term limit on local and national lawmakers. A lot of these measures are already included in our law. Why is it not working? What can we do as Kenyans? What options do we have?
Well, it's the personal integrity issues that we keep on dwelling on. And I think Dr. here bluntly and pulled no punches in actually articulating it. And remember, I also made the first observation that that is the gap. If we were to audit the implementation of the Constitution 10 years down the road, that would be one of the gaps. The people that we put in place to manage public offices and public institutions have only one thing in mind. What can I get out of it? And the dangers, though, is that because of that, we are routinely and periodically ranked almost lowest. I think we only beat Nigeria, Bangladesh, or Pakistan in the Transparency International Anti-Corruption Index. You have rightfully observed that measures that you've articulated that Colombia is thinking of introducing as a result of that referendum are actually in place. We have leadership and integrity, as I mentioned, the sound constitutional and institutional framework. We have the institutions, different institutions that are intended or purposed to fight corruption, and so on and so forth. The question is, one, the political goodwill, and thank God, I still have a lot of faith in this building bridges process. And the renewed energy and impetus by President Uhuru Kenyatta to be able to slay this, corruption dragon. What we need to do is to sustain the fight. If you are, and I think I hail, the new DPP, DCI, and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, I think, has been re-energized by these two other entities, but they must pull up the socks. We have sound legal and constitutional mechanism in place, way ahead of Colombia. And by the way, just one very quick thing. In February of this year, I attended a fellowship in Australia where it was public integrity and combating anti-corruption. And one of the observations that we made and we had the privilege of meeting with the key leadership that fight corruption, judiciary, integrity institutions, etc. And there was a general acknowledgement, both by us and also by Australian institutions, that Kenya had more progressive laws to fight corruptions. But what we lack is the kind of political goodwill and integrity that Australian people and Australian institutions have. But very finally, I think on the issue of IEBC, I think we also need to acknowledge, and I say that I didn't have faith in the commission as constituted, and yes, I agree with you. Following Roslyn's resignation, the commission should have been disbanded. But I think what is also not being effectively communicated, since these three commissioners resigned, and based on the lessons learned in 2007, the chairman of the IEBC has actually, albeit slowly, begun putting in reforms that are intended to strengthen this process. And I had a very candid and honest discussion with him over this issue, and faulted some of the decisions that they made in 2017. And I was hoping that since the electoral justice is one of those 9 pillars that constitute the building bridges, we need an opportunity to walk along those paths, introduce these institutional and legislative reforms, and the re-emergence of these two commissioners will be a stumbling block. Part of the reason and a compelling justification for them to step aside. Okay,
there's a lot to say on that subject, but I'd like to bring us to President Uhuru Kenyatta's visit to the U.S. Do you think questions, Amnesty International has written to both leaders and raised a number of issues, but do you think issues such as graft and issues such as electoral justice will come up in the meeting? Dr.
Olive, before you even reach there, you ought to have studied the trend of Donald Trump in terms of matters that affect other countries, which don't affect America. America first is his official policy. Now, throughout the period when we were having our problems here in 2017, can you really identify Donald Trump as having made a consistent and decisive decision to adopt a particular policy? If you look at Godek, the ambassador, is he still around? Yes. I hope. Oh, he is, okay. If you look at Godek's participation in everything that happened, and then when John Kerry came, when he was walking around Bomas with Ezra Chiloba, and very dismissively saying there was a big issues, but everything's okay. And then finally, his hand behind the handshake, which some people think that it was voluntary and it was magnanimous, do you really expect Donald Trump to bother about the graft in this country? And looking at his personal demeanor as a person, doesn't he have enough of his own personal problems as far as integrity is concerned to handle back home? In my view, the trip by Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, which is good, will of course follow the usual etiquette and protocol. We want some trade concessions. We want the AGOA to be strengthened. We want to have direct flights of KQ from here, which is a wonderful thing, by the way. If you have a direct flight from Kenya to Washington or wherever in the US, is a wonderful thing. Those stopovers are hard, they're back-breaking. So yes, we'll talk about trade. AGOA will be an issue. But as far as graft is concerned, which graft? As far as the elections were concerned, what was the problem with the elections? I do not see much light as far as the corruption issue is concerned and as far as the election debacle is concerned. Because for Donald Trump, in my view, reading his body language and how his policies have been articulated, everything's just fine. We must continue.
Bessy, what are your expectations of the meeting between the two leaders?
Well, it's a positive for Kenya that we are being recognized in terms of Africa, the entire continent. We're getting audience. My issue would be the audience that we have sort of been given, how are we going to capitalize? You've asked about graft. We have had catalysts, either by them and even us within ourselves, being the catalyst for the same graft. So asking Trump to help us on our graft issue, that one, I don't think it will feature anywhere. And maybe you will want to see, because we are the most key strategic partner they have in the entire Eastern Africa. That is to tell Kenyans we're not just anybody. In East Africa, we have the shots. But if we don't really get our acts together, Rwanda will take over. Yeah? So by the fact that Uhuru is there, he should be able to key in on our position, how strategic we are in this region, and put in things and ask for their help, mainly because he says the Big Four. They have institutions and companies that would have very good interest here in building the Big Four, which means better economy, work, and, and all these good things that they would want to do. But it will be very dependent on how the president plays out our strategic position to the U.S. government. On graft, that one will look on another day, maybe not with Trump.
Okay. Yeah. Felix, maybe you can weigh in on Kenya's role where the security situation is concerned within the region, because that definitely will come up. Bessy talks about Kenya being a strategic partner. We have troops in Somalia. We've previously had troops in South Sudan. We were very active in the peace negotiations there. But Donald Trump's administration, when he got into office, talked about cutting the peacekeeping budget. Do you think that will come up in the meeting?
Well, I think, first of all, by the mere fact that President Uhuru Kenyatta has been invited by Trump, I think it's a big deal. It is not always that the U.S. president, and when you talk about U.S., is still the superpower, the global geopolitics having shifted in the 90s. And so that is a special recognition. And yes, I'm inclined to believe that part of the motivation for this invitation was solely as a result of the strategic importance that Kenya plays in the politics of the sub-region. the security, Kenya is a stabilizing factor of security situation in Somalia, but also in South Sudan and indeed in the entire region. Whether we have formulated our foreign policy to elevate us to the big brother in the sub-region is a different matter, given the constant, chest thumping of President Museveni, but that's a different matter. And so I think it's a big deal, and yes, it's as a result of our strategic importance to the region. And I hope that the President Kenyatta is going to use and capitalize on that to be able to negotiate other things beyond our strategic security importance to the United States. That visit may result in bringing in goodies to strengthen his Big Four agenda, for example, and by implication may deal with the issues of the 9 issues in the Building Bridges process. But whether the question of electoral integrity or electoral justice will be discussed, I don't think that would come. Why? Because President Trump's own election in 2016 is still mired in controversy. There are serious legitimacy and credibility issues that tended to that process that led to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Rod Rosenstein, appointing a grand jury to investigate, in particular, the involvement and the meddling of Russia in that election.
That is the Robert Mueller investigation.
Robert Mueller investigation. And so what it means is that because to the extent that his own election is mired in controversy, he would be the last person to talk about electoral justice. And there were also issues of integrity surrounding, for example, public disclosure of his tax returns and things like that. And if you look at the indictment so far, both in New York, the Northern District Court, as it's called in New York, the Robert Mueller investigation itself, but also the investigation that will come up in Virginia. There are issues of financial improprieties that accompanied that process, involving Paul Manafort and involving now his former attorney, Cohen. So I don't think issues of electoral justice or integrity will be discussed, but it is a unique opportunity for the president to seize on that opportunity. And I wonder, probably, I think maybe 2 or 3 presidents enough from Africa have been able to meet the US president since 2016.
Okay.
Yeah.
Daktari, at the end of this month, we expect another world's leader, and that is Theresa May, who will be hosted in Nairobi. Why now? why Kenya and why now?
Good question. Maybe that's a question that your colleague Kanze Dena would be very competent to answer. Why now and why not before? For me, I think that what the president is doing, having stabilized his seat, because remember, until recently, until March 9th, the president was regarded as an illegitimate president, and he had big challenge even facing his outside counterparts on the very basis that his election was challenged, and not just challenged, but severely challenged, and that for the first time, I think the only one in the world, there was another president named the People's President. Now, once this stabilized, it is in the interest of President Uhuru Kenyatta that he reaches out to his international colleagues to be able to get, number one, the international legitimacy that comes with it, and number 2, to be able to access the opportunities of mutual assistance that arises from that kind of relationship. Now, Theresa May, if you recall, she also has had quite a bit of trouble back home, because this was the architect of the Brexit. And even though the vote was ruled in favor of Brexit, she's having a lot of teething problems. And key among them is her acceptability of the trading terms in the former European Union. So she's also out there looking for possible markets for her own goods and possible trade partners. Now, Kenya, obviously, being the hub of the East Central and really Southern African region, becomes very strategic in terms of if you access Kenyan markets, by extension, you can access the larger East African, Central African market. So it is a mutual symbiotic relationship that the two are seeking to achieve in my view. Why now? It might have been earlier, but how could it have been earlier when there were two presidents? Now there's one president, and therefore it rightfully goes out to look for friends. That's my take.
Okay. Bessy, I take it you agree, and that at least with Theresa May, she has some moral authority to discuss issues of electoral reform and graft.
Okay, well, the why now is that Kenya is well positioned. We are getting a grip of what we need to do as Kenyans before it first comes to president. And reason being is also, I think they want also to curtail the Eastern powers that have found so much interest in being in our country, because China is really taking over Africa. So if they don't do something, the powers will shift. So their why now is more of, we are losing our key clientele. We've lost ground because we're either being too much in their business, saying we have to fight corruption, you have to do this. They're giving us the carrot and stick kind of relationship. Now they've seen there's someone else who doesn't care whether you're doing your carrot and stick, called China. We are willing to do this for the extent of this. So they want to remove the China aspect being the dominant person in Kenya. So for why now, I think is more on their part to benefit. Again, it also shows you how important Kenya is. I mean, they can't go anywhere without us. They also need the British Army extents being in our country in Anyuki more. Yeah? So it's just a way of being diplomatic, but they have a hidden agenda. I always say there's no way you would leave your well-civilized society to come here and make friends if there is no ulterior motive to it. So there's something they're going to benefit by her coming.
Okay. Felix, I will ask you, is there an aspect of China in in these meetings? Because there's a forum for Africa that is coming up where China is concerned. What do we expect to come out of that? Because people have said Kenya needs to renegotiate, for example, our debt burden, what we owe China. Of course, we're extending the SGR. There are a lot of implications where that is concerned. Could the US and the UK also be looking for a piece of that cake?
Absolutely, and that has defined global politics from time immemorial. The emergence of China as a global economic superpower and its monopoly of businesses, not just in Kenya, but pretty much in Africa and the rest of the world, is a major source of concern for the West. And its ability to be able to, with very little conditions, to be able to get in and do business and do transactions and things like that has been a major concern. And so it is not far-fetched to make a conclusion. And if you look at the machinations and the attempts by especially the Western countries, moderating Chinese influence has been a major factor in their new foreign policy. And yes, I won't put that past it, past America and the UK. And don't forget, UK is our colonial master. And so I won't put that past them. And but again, the second limb to that question was the skyrocketing, the unhealthy debt relationship that we have with China. I think if left unchecked, I think it's going to spell very serious challenges to this country. And I think time has come when we must evaluate not just the debt burden, but also evaluate what we put these debt resources to. Remember, the unresolved issues surrounding the first Eurobond, the unresolved issues surrounding a massive loan to China, including the SGR that you pointed out. For a longer distance and for a better and a more progressive technology, Ethiopia is making with less money, Ethiopia has been able to build a better SGR than we have. And so on and so forth. So I think the skyrocketing debt burden is something that really needs to be checked.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot about allegiances here. Of course, we've talked about IEBC commissioners' allegiances to those who appointed them, parliamentarians' allegiances to those who made their office holding possible. But there's also the saying that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Where that is concerned, as far as the Kenya-China relationship is concerned, is it something we should be worried about, Daktari?
Of course we should. I think Felix has just pointed to it. Personally, as a public sensitive citizen, I'm concerned at the rate of our consumption of Chinese debt. But more of concern is the cost of that debt. If you read Dr. David Ndi's tweets, you'll be amazed. That guy, people seem to be ignoring because of his political affiliation, but that guy is laying bare the economic trouble that we are getting in as far as SGR is concerned. Now, Felix has also pointed out when he says that the Ethiopians have been able to do an SGR which is better at less the amount. And then comes in who we are. So we go to China, negotiate for a big project, but in there are embedded our cuts. So the cost of the SGR is escalated, not because the Chinese loan is expensive, but because our cuts are expensive. And because we are the people who determine whether the Chinese will get the contracts or not, the Chinese have no problem. They just put it up. After all, the burden is on your back and my back and my back, not the Chinese. So yes, there is a concern that the Chinese debt is becoming impossible. Indeed, the entire public debt has burst the limits. And only what is more upsetting is that the people put in charge, I remember the governor of Central Bank and I think Rotich, the CS, saying that don't worry, our debt is manageable. Hardly 1 year down the road, they're saying they're now seeking foreign experts to manage our debt. And something more that Kenyans are not being told as much is that the IMF actually is in the process of putting Kenya under receivership, similar to what Chase Bank went through, similar to what Imperial Bank went through. But nobody's saying it. Nobody's saying it loudly. We must question the consumption of the public debt in this country. And for information, most of these loans were procured illegally because they did not go through the parliamentary approval, which requires that for any loan to be obtained, foreign loan, the parliament must approve. Olive, today, if you look at the price of petrol in Kenya and compare with Uganda, I do not know the latest now, but the practice has been that we are more priced in terms of petrol than Uganda. Yet the petrol arrives in Mombasa, goes all through Malaba. So how then can our petroleum products be more expensive? Again, the top-ups. Look at the electricity. Transformers were brought, which malfunctioned. If today you buy tokens worth 700 shillings, what you actually get is 468. The rest, you've paid levies. All this is because of the Chinese debt and other debts, not only Chinese, but Chinese tops the list. So yes, my answer is we are concerned about the consumption of debt in this country. And that's why I said from the beginning of this show that we are concentrating on issues we should not be concentrating on. What we'll be concentrating on is to ask ourselves, what is the state of our economy? Indeed, if it was in other countries which are more self-respecting, which have citizens who are not gullible and docile, there will be a peaceful revolution in this country. We'll be asking President Uhuru Kenyatta, why have you destroyed our lives? Because the economy is in shambles. But nobody's talking about it. Because the deep state, again, dictates what the agenda of the nation will be. So now you're talking about corruption and corruption. NTV is concentrating on corruption scandal after the other. You are not highlighting the fact that IMF is putting us under receivership. Yet, when you walk across the street and go to Naivas, you'll feel the pinch. Since when did VAT apply to petrol in this country? There's a crisis, but nobody talks about it because we are not in control of our lives. Our lives are controlled by the deep state.
All right, we'll come back to that deep state because I also want to start winding down this conversation. Bessy, what's our role as me and you who are sitting here and the person who's watching and listening? What is our role in this fight, in this war against graft?
The first thing is we have to stop being gullible and we also have to stop being docile. We must take an active role to ask and question the people who have been put in these positions. I remember Dr. said once that we need to go back to those house arrests. When people have started stealing, and you know it is me who is stealing, arrest me from there. We have to take an active role. This is the part where we have put institutions, people don't want to run them. We have people who, we have laws, perfect laws, but there is no day until there's an agitation from the public itself that we can't go on this way, then it stops. Now, when he's talked about the fuel VAT, we had people clamoring, we want to have a strike with the motorists, we are not going to do all these things we want to do, striking, but nothing has happened. Yes, but the people who sit at Treasury know you will make noise for today, tomorrow you will keep quiet and move on. Same with the electricity. I said, and I'll still say it, the people in the ERC Commission, those people should be actually charged. You have been stealing from Kenyans. Whether you're complacent in it or not, you have, because it's something very personal. You are paying for 800 shillings. I didn't steal that money. I have earned my money, honestly. And when I pay for those tokens, I expect the same money. But they will put their levies, they will continue putting, but with whose authority? The Commission's authority. We have commissions that are duplicate. We duplicate the roles, and that comes again, the public wage. So who is going to bear this burden and say enough is enough? We have to take a very keen and active role in how we are dispensing our money, what we are doing, the people who are put in these positions. That, for me, that's how we will fight graft. We have to take an active role.
Okay, Felix, I'll bring you. I want to start winding down the conversation, but today the Immigration Department opened a hotline 0745660151 for reporting illegal immigrants in the crackdown ordered by the Interior CS Matiang'i. It's not the first time we've been given numbers and hotlines to use. We had a portal you can use to report graft. Matiang'i and his PS Kibicho said, you know, you can tweet us. These are our accounts. Sonko says, call me between 5 in the morning and I don't know what time and report these incidences. Do Kenyans actually take advantage of these mechanisms, or is there a reason why either people don't buy into the idea?
No, we don't take that seriously. In fact, it's one amongst the many efforts and machinations. And by the way, if you are there answering to that call, the other side of the Immigration Department, all manner of funny phone calls and reports and fictitious and fake reports will come. I mean, the Immigration Department should up its game in terms of, you know, being innovative in fighting dealing with illegal immigration. Having said that, although, by the way, I think the Interior Minister's hardline position on cracking down on that is something that, if it is done judicially, following the due process, and to the extent that there are potentially opportunities that for Kenyans that are being taken, I'm told they are, in certain instances, they are Chinese hawkers in the streets. You know, these are things, these are expertise that Kenyans can do. If it's done judicially and done following the due process, it's something that I support. But the bottom line is that in all these efforts, and going back to your question as I wind up, is the fact or our inability to deal with the deep state and state capture in the fight against corruption. By definition, and Dr. here is the professor, he can correct that. Deep state is that informal, shadowy entities and characters that have fundamental influence over the mainstream state and who are responsible for so many illicit things and many bad things that are happening in the state. And that usually go hand in hand with state capture. Be it electoral process, the extent of state capture of IEBC, the extent of shadowy elements and characters that influence decision-making at whatever level is a major factor and a major contributing factor to corruption and indeed ills that afflict governance and inhibit and militate against the realization of the spirits of the 2010 Constitution. Other countries have been very proactive in dealing with the deep state and state capture. As we speak, the South African Constitutional Court directed President Cyril Ramaphosa to appoint a judicial inquiry into the deep state and state capture, influence peddling, etc., under Jacob Zuma's administration. This is how countries deal with it. In other words, we must, to deal with corruption, it calls for personal integrity that we are lacking, but also the proactiveness of the state to crack down on the deep state and state capture.
Okay, and we end the conversation there. Unfortunately, we have to end the conversation there. But thank you very much, Dr. Thank you very much, Bessy. Thank you very much, Felix. I hope we get an opportunity to continue this conversation further, and I appreciate your input.